Kentucky basketball is really excited about getting one of their 7-footers back, but in my opinion, I don't think they're going to be able to get Zvonimir back.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, writer for Sports Illustrated for various SEC-related things. But on this podcast, we take a dive into all things Kentucky athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be discussing Zvonimir Ivisic possibly not coming to play for the Kentucky Wildcats this season. This is the start of a few pre-recorded episodes that I have because I will be out of town this first week of December, going to have some surgery done. So I'm pre-recording some of these episodes to discuss different Kentucky topics, and I think the majority of these episodes are actually going to be answering your questions, and one of you asked me about Big Z, and that's what we're going to start with today. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. If you've not subscribed to the YouTube channel or podcast feed already, I would really appreciate it if you went ahead and did that. So let's go ahead and get into it. Zvonimir Ivisic may not be coming to play for Kentucky. Now, this is something that we've talked about on and off throughout the offseason, and we've gotten to a point now where we're, 7-8 games in. I think by the time you're hearing this, the UNC Wilmington game will have already been played. Zvonimir Ivisic, at different points in this process, we've said, oh, he's going to come play for Kentucky. Oh, no, he's not. Oh, he's going to come play for Kentucky, and now here we are with the NCAA sitting on their hands, it feels like, and not letting this process go through. Now, some of you in the comments have continued to tell me your opinion about this and continue to tell me that you believe that it would be foolish for the NCAA to actually push this along in a quick and understandable manner. I tend to disagree with that. I think that the NCAA could work much faster than they have so far over these past couple of, what is it now, a month and a half, several weeks here with Big Z, and it's gotten to a point where we've pushed past a deadline. According to John Calipari, he said that from the point that they got him on campus and they submitted an application or a waiver or whatever it's called to the NCAA to get him approved, to get him eligible to play this upcoming season, they had 45 days. The NCAA had 45 days, and if they did not do something within those 45 days, then Zvonimir has to stop practicing with the team. And now we've seen here over this last week or so, and I believe that it's true, Zvonimir Ivisic has gotten sick. He's not been able to practice. He's had a couple of different minor injuries. It's been a really rough start to his Kentucky career, and what may be a very quick end to his Kentucky career as well, because based on my understanding, based on what Cal said, Zvonimir can't practice anymore with the Wildcats. Until the NCAA gets him approved, he can't go out there and spend any time with them. And so now we have to ask the question, okay, if he's not practicing with the team, will he ever get to practice with the team? Will the NCAA ever clear him to come play for the Wildcats? And right now, my answer is no. I don't think that they're going to. And why would I sit here and choose to believe that an organization that is notorious for screwing over kids in situations like this, where they could come and play for a college, why would I sit here and believe that they're going to approve him? A point that several commenters have made that I do agree with here on the YouTube channel is that you have to understand Big Z's situation. This is a 7'2", 7'3" kid that played professional basketball in another country that's already 21 years old, and this would essentially be a one-and-done type of thing for Kentucky's depth, it feels like here with the Wildcats. So it's kind of a weird process already, where Kentucky's sitting up in a position with Big Z, a player that is obviously good in some rights and has already played professional basketball elsewhere, they're in a weird spot where they want to get him cleared, and the NCAA is like, okay, well, we're already slow enough, but this is a really interesting prospect that you brought us. We're not just going to be like, okay, all right, fine, he can play whatever. The admissions office also was not going to be kind in speeding any sort of process along, which that's already come and gone, so there's no point in discussing that anymore. But Big Z, I don't think he's going to be coming to play for Kentucky. I don't think the NCAA is going to clear him either in time or is going to clear him, period. There are two different ways this could end here. I think that they could either just sit on their hands like they have apparently done. I don't know what they're doing, and Cal seems pretty frustrated with it too. I'm not quite sure how they're going about this process. I would love to know if they're doing anything at all to pay attention to this, even in the slightest. They could just sit on their hands for the rest of the season, and at that point, Big Z would just leave. I mean, there's literally no point in being here. You can't benefit from NIL. You can't benefit from practicing with the team because you can't do it according to NCAA rule. There's not any point in being in Lexington. You'd go back to Croatia, or you would go to a different college that could actually get you approved. And that's not Kentucky's fault. Well, actually, technically it is. Like Cal said, that if he had known about this 45-day thing and how long it would have taken, they would have gotten him in sooner. But it is what it is. That's how it could end. That's one way it could end. Or the NCAA could just decline it. They could at some point take their hands out from underneath their legs and say, you know what? Actually, yeah, we've taken a look at this kid's case, and we've decided that he's not eligible to come play basketball, come play collegiate basketball underneath our organization. We're not going to deem him eligible. You can tell him to screw off. That's another way that this could end. I don't foresee at any point in the near future the NCAA actually doing something positive. That's my stance on it. I say no, Big Z's not going to come because I don't trust the NCAA to actually do anything that actually helps the student athlete here in this case. So that's my take on it. If you've got any thoughts on Zvonimir Ivisic either coming to play for Kentucky, either not going to play for Kentucky at all, you can leave that in the YouTube comments below. I would love to be wrong on this, by the way. I would love for the NCAA to come out and say, hey, guess what? We're going to let Zvonimir play. We're going to deem him eligible. I'd love for them to do that within the next week or so that maybe, just maybe, he could be ready to play for North Carolina. But I don't think that's going to happen. In fact, I don't think they're ever going to approve him. So leave your opinion. If you're listening on podcast at Locked On UK, on Twitter is where you can also find me. And then you can find me in the YouTube comments on the channel. All right, I've got a question from one of you guys that is actually football related. We have not talked at all about what happened with Mark Stoops in Texas A&M. Stoops still staying at Kentucky. One of you has an interesting question about the Wildcats and the direction of the program, whether he had left and how I feel about it currently. Before I dive into that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Game Time. Let's say, hypothetically, you are looking to get some tickets to go watch Kentucky play here in the near future. Maybe it sneaks up on you. Maybe you're trying to go see the game against Penn. Maybe you're trying to go see something like this game against UNC Wilmington. Heck, maybe you're trying to go see the Antonio Reeves Bowl, and you're trying to go see Kentucky take on Illinois State here, and you want to get some last-minute tickets. You need to head over to Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event, and Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all different sporting events, and then on top of that, they've got music events, comedy events, and theater near you. Killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and then they have their best price guarantee. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Super awesome stuff over at Game Time. They've got views from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. I've used Game Time a few years myself to go to a couple of different college football games, and I can go ahead and tell you it is the place to go if you want to take a look at where you're going to sit. Perfect, exactly what you're looking for. Prices are all up front, no hidden fees. You can buy tickets in just seconds. So you need to take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, Lowest price guaranteed. All right, continuing along on what should be the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Really appreciate you making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel already, I would really appreciate it if you went ahead and did that. If you are listening on podcast, I would also appreciate it if you followed along there as well. Should be a fun month of December for Kentucky basketball. But I want to switch gears here for just a second to talk about what happened with Mark Stoops and Texas A&M, because we didn't touch it here on the podcast because we've got basketball things to talk about, quite frankly. Stoops, after defeating Louisville in what was an incredible game in the Governor's Cup, was rumored to be in the mix for the job at Texas A&M. And as the evening went on, it became more and more apparent to reporters online that were doing their investigative whatever, taking a look at what was going on. And they came to the conclusion that Mark Stoops was, in fact, going to be the next head coach of Texas A&M, barring something unforeseen. And then later on that night, something unforeseen happened, and Stoops either backed out or decided, or Texas A&M decided that they weren't going to follow through. Details came out later explaining all of this. Mark Stoops said in a press conference that he was focused on Louisville, and an opportunity after the game arose to go coach at Texas A&M, but he's comfortable being at Kentucky or something like that. Point being, Mark Stoops is not leaving for Texas A&M, and I think there was a lot of backlash online from Aggie fans about the hiring, and then also Stoops, I think, decided that that was just not simply the move for him. I think the way all of it played out was very interesting, very entertaining, quite funny to me that Texas A&M decided after getting a guy like Jimbo in and out of the program that they would not want somebody that I think is objectively a more stable hire. And they went and got Mike Elko, which I think is a very good hire. Let me be clear. I think that Mike Elko is going to end up being a good SEC head coach. We'll see how he recruits, but as far as his player development, I think he's on par with Mark Stoops and how he's going to run a more stable ship. But Indigo Marine 91 comes to us today and asks, how would the future hold if Stoops did take that job versus what direction we are heading in now? Do you think that win against Louisville made a big part of his decision and the fans gaining faith back in this team? I think the very last part of that question there is definitely accurate. I think that the win over the Cardinals made a big impact on the fans kind of coming back to this team at the very end of the season. Because you and I had this conversation, I think, a week or so ago about how Kentucky was in a really weird spot with the way that their season just kind of fell apart there towards the end, where they had a really long losing streak and they were trying to battle back. That loss to South Carolina absolutely did not help. It felt like a lost season for the Wildcats. And in theory, it kind of is. It kind of is a lost season for UK because of the pieces that they had, because of the receivers and the quarterbacks and Ray Davis in the backfield, because of your defense that was really good at taking away the ball. This team was supposed to, quote unquote, be better than what they were. And at the end of the day, fans were disappointed. There were a lot of expectations. I think there was a lot of unearned arrogance in certain areas, not from the fan base. We don't have to get into that. But I think that the win over top 10 Louisville, crushing their hopes to get into the college football playoff, that absolutely did bring some fans back and say, okay, you know what, we're still capable of doing some really solid things. 7-5, you know what, nothing to cry about. It's better than what Kentucky was doing 15 years ago. I will tell you that much. So I think the fans coming back is certainly a positive from that Louisville win, and it kind of helps you look towards the future. That's what Indigo Marine also asked, how would the future hold if Stoops actually took that A&M job? Well, I think the first thing you have to look at is getting John Sumrall from Troy. That's what everybody else was saying online. I'm not saying anything special here. John Sumrall would have definitely been in contention to be the next head coach of Kentucky football. Absolutely. And I think a lot of fans would have liked that, but there would have been some questions. Can he actually run an offense? There were a lot of fans online saying, man, if we could just get him and keep Liam Cohen and give Liam Cohen full autonomy over the offense, this would be a good team. And they could have been if John Sumrall did end up coming to Kentucky. But I'm not necessarily looking at producing a good team. I'm looking at producing a good program. And Kentucky has risen to a rank in the SEC that they have not touched consistently in years past, to where now you're sitting here going, okay, does the next guy after Mark Stoops, and you'll be saying this whenever Stoops does leave, does the next guy after Mark Stoops maintain that? How will they maintain that? Because it seems very difficult and hard to imagine the next head coach of Kentucky is going to be able to do that. I think that John Sumrall would have an opportunity to do that, but there's no telling what he could have done. I like him as a coach. I like the way defensively he has coached his teams. I like watching Troy because they seem sound, at least on one side of the ball. But you would have needed a lot of help outside of him putting together a staff that could, I think, give fans and give the university confidence that he could sustain what Mark Stoops started. So I think we would have ended up being fine one way or another. But I think if you compare that, like Indigo Marina saying, versus what direction we're heading in now, I'm still okay with Mark Stoops being the head coach of Kentucky football. He has brought this team or program to their ceiling. At different points over the last half decade, they've brought themselves to their ceiling. Now, obviously, there's been a little bit of a drop-off over the past 2 years, and that's okay. But it's not the end of the world. And you're going to continue to recruit well. Kentucky, if I'm not mistaken, is still, in the top 20 in next year's recruiting rankings? I may be wrong. I think I saw that actually earlier this morning looking at it. I may need to go double-check that. They're still doing okay in recruiting. Right now, they have what I think is a very decent staff. You fire your receivers coach and Scott Woodyard, that's fine. I think that I've got a lot of thoughts on the receiver room. But point being, I like the direction Kentucky's heading in with Mark Stoops. I'm okay with the direction that they're heading in with Stoops at the helm still. And if he leaves next year, so be it. I think we can have a conversation about the immediate future for Kentucky football with maybe Devin Leary coming back. I think he's got another year of eligibility. How this receiver room looks. Obviously, a lot of older offensive linemen coming back for Kentucky that have announced recently. How does that defense improve? How do they rebound from what was a lackluster 2023? I mean, the immediate future says, okay, Kentucky will be on par with where they were this year, or maybe a little bit improved if they can get Leary to actually work. But I think that I do prefer that over the unknown of Sumrall or somebody else. So Indigo Marine, how would the future hold if Stoops did take that job versus what direction we're heading in now? I prefer where we're heading now, but I would not be angry if Stoops did end up leaving. And yes, I do think the Louisville game was a part of the fans gaining faith. I'm not sure how much of an impact it made on his decision. I'm not sure about that. So if you've got any thoughts on Mark Stoops and company and whether or not he should have stayed, whether or not he should have left, how all that fell and how all that went down, you can leave it in the YouTube comments below. I want to dive into one more topic today. I want to take a look at Kentucky's Final Four non-con games because I've got some opinions that I want to share real quick. Before I dive into it, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. As the weather gets colder, NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So you can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. That is FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, wrapping up the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Again, if you've not subscribed to the show already, I would really appreciate it if you went ahead and did that. I want to sit here for a moment and predict the rest of Kentucky's non-conference schedule after this game against UNC Wilmington, which will be happening in just a little bit, actually. I'm recording this before the UNC Wilmington game. You've got Penn, in Philadelphia. Then you've got North Carolina and Atlanta. Then you've got Louisville on the road in your first true road game. And then you've got Illinois State. And then we're going to throw Gonzaga in here as well as we have this conversation. That Gonzaga game, by the way, happening February 10th in between SEC games against Vanderbilt and Ole Miss. So let's start here with the Penn game. Penn actually is a worse team, according to KenPom, than UNC Wilmington is. They're extremely slow on offense. They play really, really poorly on defense. They're one of the shortest teams in the country. They don't force a lot of turnovers. And they are just overall just slow. And they don't have a phenomenal record, but what they do have is a win over Villanova, which is the weird part of their season so far, because they lost to St. Joe's, which, I mean, we know what St. Joe's is now. Wait a minute, how does that trifecta work? So St. Joe's beat Villanova, and they beat Penn. So St. Joe's is better than Penn and Villanova, and Penn beat is Villanova at the bottom of this trifecta here? That's hilarious. Anyway, getting sidetracked. You lost to Maryland Eastern Shore in overtime. You lost to Belmont in overtime as Penn, but you beat Villanova by 4? You beat Lafayette by 2? It's just what a weird start to the year for the Penn Quakers, who again slow, seem lethargic according to their numbers. I need to go actually watch their offense because it's statistically not efficient either, including their defense, like I mentioned. But Penn in Philadelphia is a winnable game. It's a different style than what Kentucky's comfortable doing. But let's say, on paper, Kentucky's favored to win against Penn by 15, according to KenPom, and they're favored to win by 18 against UNC Wilmington. Let's say Kentucky wins both those games. That's not a shock. It's not a revelation to pick those 2 wins there. If they end up getting upset by one or both, I don't want you to come crying to my comments and saying, oh, look at you picked the wrong game. Yeah, and so did 95% or 99% of the rest of America if they sat down and had to pick this game. Shut up. Then you have North Carolina in Atlanta. And right now, if I had to pick this game, I say Kentucky loses. I think Kentucky loses to the Tar Heels right now. I've switched my opinion on this. Look at their schedule so far. They beat up on some really bad teams at the beginning of the year. They lost to Villanova by 2. Wait, is North Carolina at the bottom of that food chain between St. Joe's? And anyway, you lose to Villanova in overtime. Villanova's still a good team. You beat Arkansas, who is solid. And then you go and you score 100 points, 100 points in a game against Tennessee. Your offense right now, if you're UNC, you're really, really good at shooting the 3 ball. You're decent inside the arc, but where has UNC made their money so far this year? The free throw line. They are currently 23rd in the country in point distribution, percentage of total points from the foul line. 25% of North Carolina's points per game come from the charity stripe. That's an extremely high number. You look at the game against Tennessee and you say, okay, how many free throws did they take against the Vols? 38. Compared to Tennessee's 16. Compared to Tennessee's 16. Tennessee in this game lost by 8. And they took less than half of the free throws that UNC took. They made less than half. UNC made 32. Impressive stuff from North Carolina. You go and look at the rest of their schedule. They're consistently taking somewhere between 24 to 23 free throws a game. Kentucky's going to have their hands full. This is a very solid North Carolina offense. Now, their defense has not been phenomenal. But it's not been bad. By no means has it been bad. Statistically, it's not been bad. They're one of the most experienced teams in the country, top 5 in that regard. Their average player has 3.13 years of experience. Holy cow. They're experienced, they shoot well, they get to the foul line, and they make you earn it. How does Kentucky, with a young team, replicate their performance against Miami at a neutral site. It's going to be much more difficult. I think right now, Kentucky, that'll be their second loss of the season. Did I say first loss earlier? No, if I did, let me rephrase. It's second loss of the season. I keep forgetting the Kansas game happened. I tried to put that out of my mind immediately after it did. So I think you lose to North Carolina after beating UNC Wilmington and Penn. Louisville on the road, I think, is another game that you have to look at and say, okay, can we keep them off the foul line? Because Louisville does a better job than North Carolina at getting to the foul line. 27.7% of Louisville's points come from the charity stripe. 5th nationally. 5th. This is not a good team, by the way. The Cardinals, still not a great team. They're one of the worst teams in the nation in three-point percentage. Defensively, they give up shots early in the shot clock, which I think benefits Kentucky from a matchup perspective. Kenny Payne continues to have the most mind-boggling press conferences. Just things that are thrown out that may or may not need to be said. You lose to Chattanooga. You barely beat UMBC. You lose to Texas by 1. You lose to Indiana by 8. And then you beat New Mexico State in overtime. And then you beat Bellarmine by 5. Excuse me. You beat them by 5. This is, we'll obviously have a large sample size of games. Virginia Tech, DePaul, Arkansas State, Pepperdine, I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm an idiot. But point being, we'll have some games to talk about whenever we actually do the preview episode for this one. But I think that Kentucky will be challenged. I think they'll be challenged because this is their first true road game, and there will be like 16 Louisville fans there. And how they respond in that one will be fun. And then there's Illinois State, who is a little bit better than Penn. Doesn't have the solid victory over Villanova like the Quakers do. And offensively, they're one of the worst teams in the nation. Defensively, they've played okay defense, but they've also not played anyone, period. That was worth a rip. So I think Kentucky beats Louisville. I think they beat Illinois State. So I think they go 5-1. And then obviously you have the Gonzaga game. I think at home, if Kentucky is still clicking offensively, I think they take this. I think they take this one at home after seeing the way they played against Miami. Now, it will be competitive. Let me be clear. It will not be a 22-point win. I think it'll be close. But I think that Gonzaga, just slightly worse than they have been in years past, not a good three-point shooting team coming out the gate. I think Kentucky could take this one at home. 6-1 for the rest of their non-con games, losing to North Carolina. So if you've got any thoughts on Zvonimir, about Mark Stoops, or about the non-conference slate, you can leave that in the YouTube comments below. I think that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at @LanceDawe_. You can follow me on social, the show on social at Locked On UK. You can also follow it on Instagram at Kentucky Podcast. So any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.